Perrin Road will end and you will make a left on Mackall Road. You will be passing through field and forest. The landscape on Mackall Road has changed since colonial times and reflects its change in use. The woods along the route were all tobacco fields a few decades ago. If you take note of the foliage, you will notice that the loblolly and Virginia pines are relatively small in size. Some are tiny and the hardwoods among them are quite young. Woods now obscure whole settlements, communities, and farmsteads that were related to the cultivation of tobacco. As we drive down, take note of the farms on your right, one of which is still owned and worked by the Perrin family, which has held the same land for nearly 400 years. The fields now rotate between corn and grain crops. The Turner family owned the farm on the left-hand side of the road during the 19th century. If you look past the fields on your right, you can see the Patuxent River. Tobacco was a crop that used tremendous amounts of nutrients from the soil. As opposed to rotating crops, new fields would be constantly cleared and planted, or the same field used over and over again until the soil was depleted. On your right, 1.7 miles from the turn onto Mackall, is a small house that was built as a school that served white children in the neighborhood. It was called Wallville School, as this area was known as Wallville. The school for African American children, also called the Wallville School, was about 1 mile to the north and has been reconstructed in Prince Frederick. The Calvert County schools were finally integrated in 1966. Helen Gray tells a harrowing story of her school day and the work that came after it.
And I had get on and go and make a fire to school. Go get water and put in the school, because they had to run water then. Bring back, let the fire get hot, cut the stove down, go back home, do my work, and get dressed and walk back to the school. People blessed now. We had miles to walk to school, get wet, wind blowing, you get in the school, it was so cold in there. Some days, till the teacher get her bell, said, let's go to the pond and skate to keep warm. It was so cold, we couldn't write, and the school was just like you had took the windows, the wind come through that snow blowing, rain. You stand up around the stove, you ain't know the fire was in there. Now people is blessed. Then after we get through like going to the Tobacco Bay, he came at 12 o'clock at night. You know where? The clock, it's a Sunday night, when that clock hit 12 o'clock, he called you up. Let's go. Take our light, get to the Tobacco Bay and sit on so we could have light, you know, to see how to draw the plants. Now when the sun coming up in the morning, we was back, go in the field, had to plant all those plants out before we come and have breakfast. Then the lady I worked for, she liked me. I was small, 9 years old. So keep you at school some days. I go down and wash up, put on something clean, go down there and work. And I get home nighttime, but 2 miles better. It be around 10:30 and 11 o'clock in the dark, walking home. I worked for them people from 9 years old up here in the 70s. That's family people, good people, just like my mother to me.
Sharecropping and tenant farming were tough ways of life. Listen to Wilson Perrin, former county commissioner an assistant secretary at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources under Governor O'Malley, as he talks about sharecropping from the sharecropper's point of view.
I think it was a transition period. If you look at what the country was going through, prior to that, you had slavery. I think the sharecropping arrangement was one step above slavery. Of course, in slavery, you had the slaves on the farm, and slaves did everything that actually the sharecroppers were doing. The difference was when the slaves were emancipated, what happened, some, of course, none actually had a place to go. One way, so what happened down south, a lot of the big plantation down south, they just released the slaves, or they gave the slaves some land on their own, and they actually farmed on their own. In Maryland, they used the sharecropping to actually still use the slaves, if you will, to actually farm, give them a little money, give them some housing. And when you look at that arrangement at the time, it was when you didn't have any money starting out, when you didn't have a place to go, it was a way at least to get started. But it was also a system that kept you there. Unless you got out and you worked construction, and as the kids got older, they went to college or better themselves through education, you were doomed to stay in that sharecropping process because, again, schools, most people dropped out of schools to work on the farm, and they only had enough education to work in the agriculture or the farming environment as a laborer working on the farm. So I would say it was a system put together to keep you in the system until you actually figured out yourself how to make it better and get out of it. And it actually helped the people who didn't have housing, that were willing to get in a sharecropping arrangement. And when I look at it, I'm wondering what would happen to a lot of these families if they didn't have that opportunity. They didn't own land. Like I said, when the slaves were freed, some of the approaches were different. Some sold land to slaves. You got in the sharecropping environment, you could actually buy yourself out at some point, buy some land, and then you actually were able to raise your own tobacco. And actually, once you raised your own tobacco and you got the whole amount, then you can see money coming in. But without land, and land ownership is still a problem today. Without land ownership, you got to depend on someone else to provide those resources for you. In the sharecropping environment, when I look back on it, when I was in the middle of it, I didn't know whether it was fair or not. That's all I knew. I didn't know what other people did. Most people I knew worked on these farms, or actually they had parents who actually had some jobs as truck drivers and things like that. But that's all I knew. But looking back on it today, there are some things that I would question in that overall arrangement. Was it actually a better way to do it? Was it a way you could have carved out the land, sold them the land, and then you actually hire them to raise the tobacco? But when you look at that from a business standpoint, you didn't have a ready resource of labor all the time. And one of the reasons why you don't have sharecropping today is that you don't have the younger people who are willing to work in that environment to make it happen. Plus, of course, the other things what happened with tobacco. But the biggest thing I see is that in that sharecropping arrangement, it was an arrangement that guaranteed you had someone living there, because if they didn't raise tobacco, if they didn't make that farm produce, they're out of there. And there were other people willing to come in. So, you had to work to actually keep the house that you lived in. There wasn't much interaction between the owner of the farm and the sharecropper. The only interaction you had was when the owner of the farm picked up my dad when tobacco was sold at the tobacco market, and they would go up together. I remember him getting in the back of the car, and she was a white lady, Ms. Lyons. She would be driving in the front, and he would sit in the back.
Was there another passenger in the passenger seat?
No. This was the 50s, and you would not had a black man sitting up front with a white woman. So I remember him getting in the back of the car and driving up there, and he would come back and he would have the money that was split up. I'm not even sure that he even understood, because he didn't go to school, whether the split up was fair or not, but he brought back about $200 or $300, and that was about it. And he worked on, as I said, he worked construction. My mother managed most of the money. She managed most of the money because she could get the most mileage from the little dollars that we did have. Bill Sansbury was sort of I would call, he was, I guess the term today would be manager of the farms. I guess back in those days you called him an overseer. He was sort of the one who interacted between the owner of the farm and the tenants, sharecroppers. And we saw quite a bit of him. He was a pretty good guy, pretty personable. And I don't, really growing up back in the 50s, I don't recall any major conflicts, because I guess what you don't know is what you don't know. You just know the environment which you lived in. And that environment back then was that it was separate. It wasn't equal, but it was separate.
Daniel Brown, a former tenant farmer, reflects on his pre-teenage youth.
I was born October 3rd, 1916, and this is my home here in Calvert County. I was born right here in Calvert County. My uncle was the only blacksmith within this county, and he had a farm, and he sold half of my farm to my father, and the people around cut the timber out of the woods and carried it to the mill, got the lumber, and built a house itself for my father and his friend. It was 1928, and that winter he died. After my father passed, they come there and say it was their property. They had auction sale and sold it. Back a long time ago, black lady wasn't supposed to, they wouldn't allow them to live close to the road. Dirt road at one time, they had to build back. Anyway, they said it was their property. Didn't owe nobody nothing on it. Had an auction sale and sold our farm for $700. And the man that bought our place, his name Mr. Soper, and I had to work for Mr. Soper for $3 a month and ordered the rest of my sisters and brothers to stay in this house, which belongs to us, because they take it from us. He didn't pay me. I didn't get paid. I was supposed to get $3 a month. The only thing that he gave me, Milky Way and Babe Ruth candy come out in 39. I got a bar of Babe Ruth candy. And he had this old big house over there. I had to sleep in the shed, but in the wintertime I slept in a cot in the kitchen. I had good food to eat the same food that they had. But everybody, I didn't get any money. Then when I got there, wouldn't let me go to school. The children out there, I can remember the children walking out there to go walk over to Plump school, and they would say, "Come on, Dad, go to school." And he would say, "Oh, what are you going to school for? You ain't gonna be nothing."
Helen Gray talks about what she calls renting.
We were renting back in those years. Just like you say you rent an apartment or whatever, we were renting. And we could farm on the land where we was renting, see. We worked on the farm, half and half in them years. If we raised tobacco on the main land, he get half and we get half. See, that's really what years back. Yeah, be surprised. Come a long ways, honey, long ways. We ain't get nothing much then. Tobacco was penny a pound out of tobacco. Nickel, quarter for the best. You could sell it at the market in Baltimore. You just have packed down in Hogsett back in there and ship it to Baltimore. They had trucks hauled it to Baltimore, else on a steamboat. And go back to Baltimore. Oh well, anybody could rent people farm then. They need somebody to help working. Yeah, that's all it was to do. And they had houses on it for the tenants, to live in. And they share crop. Had people cash money for rent. Share crop. Yeah. Yeah, that's all people could do to make a living was farm. Farm, that's all. And I mean, the place was growed up, you had to take holes and dig the bush and things before you could plant crops out. I done did some cutting and grubbing and a little bit of everything in my days.
Folks like Helen Gray and Daniel Brown persevered as best they could and found joy in their lives.